Turkey steps up its campaign against the PKK and warns Western countries of its threat. The US and EU already consider the Kurdish armed group a terrorist organization. But is that enough? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Phobia Thibault. 3 months, 3 bombings, 75 people killed. There have been a series of attacks across Turkey over the last few months, which have been largely carried out by ISIL and fighters linked to the Kurdistan Workers Party or PKK. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says although most Western nations consider the PKK a terrorist organization, they don't go after the group in the same manner they do ISIL or al-Qaeda. The most recent attack was on Saturday in Istanbul. An ISIL suicide bomber targeted a popular shopping street filled with civilians. 5 people were killed and more than 35 others injured. Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu called the attack inhumane and said Turkey would continue its fight against terrorism with resolution and determination. Now, leaders around the world have condemned the attack in Istanbul, but President Erdogan says Europe is still not taking the threats against Turkey seriously, especially those posed by the PKK.
There is no reason for it not to explode in Brussels, where an opportunity has been given to the supporters of the terror organization to show off in the heart of the city or in any other place in Europe. Despite this bitter reality, European countries are acting recklessly, as if they were dancing in a minefield. You never know when you're going to step on a landmine.
Well, Erdogan says the world is too accepting of the PKK. It's an armed group Turkey has been at war with on and off for the last 40 years. The PKK was formed in 1978 and originally fought to establish an independent Kurdish state. Its war against the Turkish government began in 1984 and lasted almost 20 years, ending in 2013 when the PKK agreed to a ceasefire. It said it would formally end its push for a Kurdish state as long as ethnic Kurds in Turkey would be given more autonomy. But that ceasefire ended last July. The PKK said the Turkish government hadn't upheld its side of the agreement. And since then, there have been a series of attacks. A car bomb in Ankara killed 25 military personnel and 4 civilians on February 17th. An offshoot of the PKK called the Kurdistan Freedom Falcons, or TAK, said it carried out that attack. TAK also allegedly carried out the suicide bombing in Ankara that killed 37 civilians on March 13th. And also this month, the PKK announced it had joined forces with 8 other communist groups to form the People's United Revolution movement. They say their goal is to fight what they call fascism in Turkey and possibly overthrow the ruling AK party. The Turkish government has launched airstrikes against PKK strongholds in southern Turkey and northern Iraq. Well, let's get the thoughts of our guests now on today's Inside Story. In Ankara, Bilal Sambur, Professor of Social Sciences at Yildirim Beyazıt University. In Washington, D.C., Sinan Çiri, Director of the Institute for Turkish Studies. And joining us on the line from Istanbul is Connie Turan, an MP for the ruling Turkish AK Party and Deputy Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in Parliament. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being on Inside Story. Mr. Turan in Istanbul, if I may begin with you. The PKK is already on the European and American list of terrorist organizations. An attempt to delist the PKK at the European Parliament failed last year. Sanctions are in place. What more does the Turkish government want today?
First of all, actually, that the PKK has been on the list for a long time. And instead, that despite this fact that American government actually works with the PKK branch in Syria, and also many European countries very much tolerant to PKK actions in Europe. They are freely collecting money, they are freely demonstrating. 2 months ago I was in Berlin, and then they were demonstrating against Turkish government in front of the parliament. Imagine that al-Qaeda or ISIS supporters do this in these areas, what would happen? So I think we need sincerity and the joint action against all kinds of terrorists You cannot use one terrorist group to another one.
When you say sincerity is needed, what precisely would you like to see happen? What action would you like the Europeans or the Americans to take against the PKK?
The first one, for the Europeans, actually, PKK and its supporters should not act freely in Europe. They are broadcasting there. They are collecting, actually, forcefully collecting money, and the police actually blind-eyed to that. And also, they are fully, organizing events and setting up associations, proxy associations. Actually, everyone knows that this is a PKK, offshoot organization. So that act is how they act against ISIS or al-Qaeda. We want the same kind of action against PKK. Same as U.S. You cannot collaborate with a terrorist group inside Syria against another terrorist group, like this PYD against ISIS. PYD is a Syrian branch of PKK.
Let's get the thoughts of our other guests before we go deeper into the question of Syria and the Kurds in Syria. Let's get the thoughts of Sinan Chidi in Washington, D.C. Do you agree with Connie Turan when he says there's a double standard when it comes to the PKK? We heard the Turkish government say recently that when attacks take place in the West, there's an outcry, there is sympathy and calls to do more to prevent such attacks. But when similar attacks happen in Turkey, in Istanbul or Ankara, when Turkish civilians are killed, there is condemnation, certainly, but not as loud.
Yes, I think one of the things that we're seeing here, there was an article that came out in the Guardian newspaper in the UK, which suggested, we were all Charlie and we were all Paris, but are we going to be Ankara? There is certainly a widespread perception amongst Turkish Americans as well as Turkish citizens in Turkey itself who do actually perceive right now that it is clear that one Turkish life doesn't seem to be necessarily as worth as much as one European life. And there is some sort of regularization of bomb attacks not being covered as effectively and widespread by major international outlets such as CNN, certainly here in America, but to a lesser extent in Europe, sure.
Do you think it would change if, let's say, European citizens or Americans were killed in attacks that were carried out by the PKK in Turkey?
Well, I mean, the last bombing that did take place in Istanbul just yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, at least two of the people that were killed were dual American and Israeli citizens, and that, as a result, has gotten the attention of both the Israelis as well as the Americans here to a certain extent. But yes, there is a lack of press attention towards what's happening in Istanbul, and that's not okay in my opinion either.
But do you think that would change? The question actually I wanted to ask you, do you see the Europeans or Americans changing their stance towards the PKK, going beyond just listing them as a terrorist organization, if these attacks against civilians were to continue and perhaps include civilians from other nationalities?
Absolutely. I think if there was a certain escalation where more foreign citizens were killed in Turkey itself, that would be much more widely discussed amongst the Western media outlets, simply because they would be seeing, some of their own citizens under the spotlight. But there is a definite lack of focus and attention, and there is widespread condemnation by Turkish media outlets as well as Turkish citizens, asking why do we not get the same consideration as any other people getting killed as a result of ISIS and PKK attacks.
Okay. Let's bring in Bilal Sandur to hear your views on this, Bilal. And I also want to ask you about the PKK. You've said before we went on air that you believe the Turkish government has what you call PKK phobia. Tell us why you say this. Tell us a bit more about this.
Well, Kurdish question is very oldest question and the most important question in the history of Turkish Republic, and for a long time Turkey has struggled to solve this problem in terms of politics or in terms of military. But the most rebellious Kurdish movement against government is PKK. PKK has more than 30 years carry out a guerrilla war against the Turkish government, and Turkish government paid a very heavy casualty for that in terms of economical losses, in terms of human losses as well.
Right.
So Turkey, after this experience, Turkey believed that whatever carry out against Turkey, it is organized by PKK. So in every cases, in every terrorist attack in Turkey, PKK is the prime and usual suspect. This is the general perception of Turkish public and Turkish government.
Connie Turan, what do you respond to that? Bilal says that the Turkish government today has what he called PKK phobia, but Turkey is facing multiple threats, including from ISIL, as we've seen from the attack on Saturday in Istanbul, which is believed to have been carried out by ISIL. Why does the Turkish government insist on always pointing the finger at PKK first?
No, Turkish government did not finger on PKK at the last bombing, and today it is announced that it was carried out by ISIL. So I do not accept that the Turkish government has got the PKK phobia. Actually, that in the peace process time, the things were much different, and then PKK poisoned this peace process. And then they actually, instead of disarming or moving out, then they did contrary. They wanted to control all the areas, and then more arming, particularly young people. So this is the fact. It's not the phobia. Phobia means that something does not happen, but you have that kind of, this fear. This is not a phobia, this is a fact.
What do you say, Bilal, to Connie, who says that the PKK poisoned the peace process? And, when you look at the recent attacks perpetrated by groups affiliated to the PKK, they've targeted civilians, and the tactics used by these groups affiliated to the PKK are similar to the tactics that we're seeing in Iraq or even in Syria used by ISIL. So the question many people are asking today is, what is the PKK fighting for exactly today? What is the end game? And do they still represent Kurdish interests in Turkey?
Well, during the peace process, really, PKK took advantage of peace process, and it organized itself, it arms its supporters, and it prepares itself for a new struggle phase. And now PKK is fighting against government in the city center. So PKK changed its strategy. We could say that PKK is really destroy peace process. That's a very important fact. But there is a perception of Turkish government. Turkish government used the concept of terror cocktail. By terror cocktail means PKK, ISIL, TAK, and PYD, PYG, all these terrorist organizations are the same and somehow related to each other, and their common enemy is Turkish government. So, for example, Turkey don't separate PKK terrorism or ISIL terrorism. At the end of the day, they say all these organizations are targeting Turkish people and Turkish government. So Turkey considers himself, there is a common enemy, this common enemy consists of various terrorist groups, and the common enemy of this terrorist group is Turkish government. That is what terror cocktail concept means. Which has been used by Turkish government.
Chinan Chiri, all these terrorists, sorry to interrupt you, I just want to bring in Chinan Chiri in Washington, D.C. and ask him about what you just said, about the Turkish government considering all these organizations the same, treating them the same way anyway. Do you think they are all the same? I mean, is the PKK similar to ISIL today and the Kurdish groups that are fighting in Syria? Should they be all put in the same bag?
Look, Turkey has a very significant set of problems that it's dealing with, and all of the things that you've mentioned and the other guests have mentioned are basically a riddle wrapped in an enigma. Mm-hmm. Sure, Turkey is definitely very much facing a clear and present danger from the Islamic State, and yesterday's perpetrator was identified as a possible agent of the Islamic State, a Turkish citizen born in Gaziantep. Also, the offshoots of the PKK, the TAK, the Freedom Hawks, the Kurdish Freedom Hawks, have certainly carried out and will likely carry out more terror attacks in Turkey. So yes, there are multiple threats that are coming into Turkey and threatening public safety. But if we want to go into the sort of the wider and deeper debate as to where these originated from, we don't have the time or the sort of means to sort of disentangle this riddle. But one thing that has to be brought in, why are these attacks increasing in intensity? I mean, if you look at Turkey's southeastern provinces, the Turkish government has begun numerous what they call sort of pacification missions to eradicate PKK officials and operatives within Turkey's Kurdish provinces. Mm-hmm. These measures are resulting in significant casualties of Turkish citizens, anywhere from children up to the elderly, and widespread curfew have been imposed with no press access or internet access by citizens of these towns, where the Turkish military is going in there and ruthlessly trying to root out both PKK militants as well as civilians. And there's a widespread perception that the Turkish government is punishing the southeastern provinces. Mm-hmm. And this is directly resulting, according to some, in direct retributive attacks on the part of PKK, as well as some of its more extremist offshoots. So that's just one aspect. If you look at the fact of why ISIL is attacking Turkey, there is a widespread perception, not just in Washington, but across Western capitals, that the Turkish government, specifically the president, was complicit with the Islamic State in cooperating with this organization for a long time.
There is, of course, that aspect, but I don't want to get into that. I do want to come back to the way the West deals with the PKK versus how it deals with other so-called terrorist organizations. And I want to bring back Turan in Istanbul on the line. Turan, the argument that's being made in some quarters right now, especially in the United States and even in Europe, is that you can't rely on the PKK and its affiliates in Syria in the war against ISIL, at the same time as calling the PKK a terrorist organization, that there's a double standard there, that you need the PKK in order to fight ISIL in places like Syria and Iraq. What do you respond to that?
First of all, the ISIL actually, they always attack against moderate opposition. In the beginning, there was no, except Kobani, there was no fighting between ISIL and PYD. By the way, actually, that is something sinister going on. Some places ISIL take over from moderate opposition, and then suddenly, with the American help, then PYD take over from ISIL, and actually they do ethnic cleansing. They actually clean up from Arabs and Turkmens, like Tel Abyad, and then they control the whole region.
Right. But just coming back to my question, sorry to interrupt you, Turan. Just coming back to my question. My question is, the reason perhaps, we're not seeing a tougher stance against the PKK in Europe or the US is because there are increasingly voices being raised, voices saying that the PKK, in fact, should be considered a partner in the fight against ISIL.
That is why I'm saying that this is wrong. You cannot be a partner with a terrorist organization to fight another terrorist. So, because at the end, that you empower this terrorist organization, and it will hit back to you maybe in very short time. You don't know it. The main issue is that if you are in principle the fighting against terrorism, you should fight all together. So not differentiate between PYD and ISIL. Actually, as I said before, then they are somehow acting very, the collaborative manner, even with the regime. So this was used for the demographic change in the north of Syria.
Sinan Chidi, there are those who say that the PKK is trying to earn sympathy in the international arena by appearing like they're assisting the international coalition forces in the fight against ISIL in Syria and Iraq through, its branches abroad. Do you think that there's that going on here, that there's something sinister that the PKK is involved in?
I mean, sure. I mean, the PKK is no sort of an organization which should be respected or augmented on. Gaining sympathy, I'm not sure. The United States government is in a very difficult position. On the one hand, it has to sort of look up to Turkey and say, look, we understand, we feel, we sympathize with you, and we condemn all forms of terror. But on the other hand, there's a reality on the ground which suggests that the PYD is the only sort of organization in Syria, basically doing the groundwork for trying to get rid of ISIL. In terms of gaining sympathy, the PKK really has shot itself in the foot. Prior to the end of the peace process, a lot of analysts were warning that if they ever resorted back to an armed struggle against to achieve their aims vis-a-vis the Turkish government, that they would lose international morale and support that they had garnered in the last couple of years, and that's definitely true. They have. But in terms of the notion of, if we're going to sort of, classify the PYD, ISIL and everything because as one terrorist organization, that becomes a problem simply because, if we're looking at what are the individual countries' intentions towards Syria, are we not trying to all defeat the Islamic State? The answer to that up until now is no, it hasn't been. Every country, including Turkey, its primary aim has not been to defeat the Islamic State. It's been to topple the Assad regime. That's been an infatuation of the Erdogan regime for the last, 3 to 4 years. It hasn't been to defeat the Islamic State, and now it's an infatuation also to end the PYD, as well as the PKK. So there seems to be many sort of pistons misfiring between regional allies, as well as the United States and Turkey, in terms of what their actual goals are.
Bilal Sandur, what do you see as the solution then? I mean, on the one hand, you have the Turkish government saying Europe and the Americans need to take more action against the PKK. The Europeans, of course, and the Americans in a dilemma right now because they need the Kurds in places like Syria against ISIL. What is the solution, if there is any? And also, a question that I've wanted to ask you before, why did the PKK resort back to the armed struggle?
The answer of your first question is actually there is no solution because everything is very much complicated and you don't know who's in which side. If we could analyze, as answer your question, the perception of Turkey as an existential threat. What is the existential threat for Turkey? Turkey perceives PKK and it is a sister organization as a sister threat for itself. US consider ISIL as a prime threat. Europe consider refugee crisis as a prime threat for itself. So the problem is actually it is a matter of your priority, or it is a matter of your perception of the threat. So,
but is the PKK? Let me ask you: is the PKK a threat to Europe and the Americans? Is it?
Actually, I mean, Europe and America don't consider PKK as a prime threat for its existence, although they consider PKK as a terrorist organization. But Turkey said that it is existential threat for me. At the same time, it is an existential threat for Europe and for US. And Turkey asked Europe and US consider PKK just as the way they consider ISIL as an existential threat.
Okay. Thank you so much for a very interesting discussion. We have to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you, Connie Turan, Bilal Sandur and Sinan Chidi. And thank you as well for watching. You can also see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. From me, Fully Batibo, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.